So it's hard to predict when you're going to be involved in a motor vehicle accident, and sometimes it happens while you're on the clock, performing your job duties, despite the fact that you're in a vehicle. So generally how that happens is you're asked to run an errand before or after lunch, or on your way into work, or on your way home from work. You're asked to do something work-related for your employer, and during that time you're involved in an accident. The other way that happens is if you're driving as part of your job duties every day, and they involve actually being in a car and operating a vehicle on the streets, and you're getting paid to drive for your employer, and you're involved in a wreck. Either way, if you're on the clock and you're involved in a motor vehicle accident, there are special considerations that have to be made to that case. And mainly those relate to how the medical bills are paid. If you're on the clock and you're injured in a car wreck, then it's a workers' compensation injury. What that means is the primary payer of your medical bills by law has to be the workers' compensation insurance company, not the car insurance, not the PIP that would be primary had you not been on the clock. So many times that's not something that you're thinking about. You rightfully shouldn't be thinking about that when you're in a wreck, because you should be thinking about your own injuries, the injuries caused perhaps to other cars or other people in your car, and getting treatment for those injuries. That should be your primary concern, and I still encourage people to do that. But once everything has settled down a little bit and you're trying to figure out what to do next, if you're on the clock, you have to notify your employer. Your employer then has to notify the workers' compensation carrier. The workers' compensation carrier will usually assign a case manager to your claim. That case manager will basically quarterback all the care that you need and organize all the care that you need for the injury associated with the wreck. So sometimes it's slow getting started because a wreck happens. Sometimes employees that are involved in the wreck don't realize they're actually injured until later that day or the next day. So they don't immediately tell their employer they're hurt. They call the employer and they say, I've been in a wreck, I'm going to be late. And then they realize later they're actually hurt. And by that time, the employer's thinking, well, wait a minute, you told me you weren't hurt, so I didn't notify my workers' comp carrier. But many times in every kind of wreck, the injuries don't really show themselves, or the symptoms don't manifest or become evident until later, sometimes a day or so later. When that happens and you're on the clock, you have to go back to your employer and say, look, I know I told you initially that I wasn't injured, but I do think I have an injury, and I do think I need treatment. And if you need to notify the comp insurance, please do so. They then have an obligation to do so. In the interim, you certainly can get medical care on your own personal injury protection coverage, which is on the vehicle, the car insurance on the vehicle. So I would never delay doing that, because you know life or limb could be at risk. So always get the medical care you need. But as far as who's going to pay the bill, it's important, if workers' comp is on the hook for this, that they be made to pay it. Because if you process this case, even if you're on the clock and you go outside of workers' comp, all the insurance companies for the automobile carriers are going to say, wait a minute, we're not responsible for those bills because they were rightfully the responsibility of the workers' compensation carrier. Therefore, we're not paying them. And they would be correct if you're on the clock. So if you're involved in an accident while you're on the clock, on the job, again, this doesn't include driving to work, from work, unless you're on an errand for the employer at the time, or your lunch break. It doesn't include driving to and from your lunch break. You're not on the clock if you're doing those things. However, if somebody at your employer's office has asked you to do some special errand for them while you're headed home or while you're headed to or from lunch, then you are technically potentially on the clock. So if you are injured in a motor vehicle accident and you're on the clock, you need to pay attention to these issues because they're important. If you have questions about it, you can find us on the web at zarzaurlaw.com, or you can call us at 855-HIRE-JOE. Thank you.